Welcome to Southern Steep, the public health and social justice podcast brought to you by NASTAD, a nonprofit, nonpartisan association mission to end the intersecting epidemics of HIV, viral hepatitis, and related conditions. Much like Brewing Stronger Tea, this platform aims to brew a stronger community by centering community leaders' voices and their innovative work in the Southern United States.
Hi, Nicole.
Hey, Shanice. How are you?
I'm good. I know it's been a while since I had the chance to record an episode, so I'm excited to be back with the crew. And I'm also really looking forward to having a friend of the pod join us today, and also a friend of the pod. And we're going to be talking a bit about community-centered approaches to harm reduction, which is, some of my favorite work that we do at NASTAD. So I'm really looking forward to that.
We got a lot of good people on this episode today, a lot of really good vibes. There's some really good plants that we're seeing as well. And it's just a really great day to be here. So really excited to do this with you, Shanice.
Right back at you, Nicole.
So you all heard it. We have guests today. We have two folks here. And they are joining us today from the world of harm reduction to share their experiences working in community-based spaces. And one of these friends is an advocate based in North Carolina, and the other is one of our NASTAD colleagues. So I'm excited to introduce Raymond Velazquez using he, him pronouns. Raymond is a North Carolina certified peer support specialist and is the director of prevention for the Western North Carolina AIDS Project. He has a rich history as a dedicated advocate within the LGBTQIA+ HIV prevention and harm reduction communities, spanning over 7 years. Living with HIV and navigating the path of recovery, Raymond brings a distinctive perspective and profound empathy to his advocacy efforts. As a seasoned advocate in HIV and harm reduction and drawing on years of lived experience, Raymond's mission revolves around serving marginalized communities such as people who use drugs and Brown, Indigenous, and other people of color, BIPOC communities. Our other guest is Alison Gaye, using she, her, hers pronouns, and she is a senior manager on the drug user health team who is currently focusing on strengthening the capacity of syringe service programs to respond to COVID-19. This program aims to strengthen the capacity of SSPs to serve as critically essential access points for COVID-19 services. Prior to NASTAD, Alison worked for the Louisiana Department of Health as the first statewide syringe service program coordinator. In addition to governmental public health work, Alison has managed the largest SSP in the state of Louisiana and assisted in the development of the first gender-affirming care clinic in Louisiana. Welcome to you both.
Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me today.
So I read a lot of great things in those bios. Is there anything that you all want to add or want to fill in for our listeners?
Yeah. So although I think bios and things like that, they're always great. It's always great to set a preface for getting to know someone, but I'm very humble. So I'm just a person, just trying to, help and do the right thing and provide compassion, care for people like me, or the things I've experienced. So at the end of the day, I'm just a person, just like anyone else too. So
the best way to make me blush is to read my bio in front of a group of people, for sure. It's something I think about a lot as harm reductionists, right? Like a lot of times we try to let the work speak for itself, And so when we have to put it down in a couple of paragraphs or a bio sketch, it's like, oh gosh, gotta read this out loud.
Agreed.
And then it's like having to write about yourself and your accomplishments.
They are just fantastic accomplishments. And I know it can be hard to own that sometimes. I also hate attention, but just try to soak it up because you deserve it.
That's right.
Before we dive into the world of harm reduction, I'm a pop culture girly, and I would love to hear about the pop culture that you've been consuming. I would like to know if y'all have seen the lesbian bodybuilder movie, because I sure have.
I am a huge Beyonce fan. So Cowboy Carter has been on repeat every day. I was listening to it right before this podcast. But it's just iconic. but yeah, I just love everything she's doing. The preface of the work, she kind of like taking back music in a way, and like not having to define yourself is a very big key underlining tone, like with Renaissance to like just, I'm me and like that's it, and I don't have to be restricted to labels. So it's a very like resonating theme with me. But I've heard of that movie that you mentioned, but I have not seen it yet. But yeah, I might have to check it out.
It's really good. I saw it the day after it came out. Love Lies Bleeding, for folks who aren't familiar. It's intense, but it was really, 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 really good. But I hear you completely about Cowboy Carter. Just like the way that she was able to like bring in so much of like the Black history of Southern music. Like, as a Black person, it's very familiar to me, but I understand that it's not legible to a lot of people, just looking at the way folks have responded to that album. And just like the way you noted just like the way that she brings in that conversation about like defying genres, like the transitions on that album were masterful. Like the way that she brought in Linda Carter, like
Alison, what about you?
I have not seen Love Lies Bleeding yet, and I am upset about it. I was saving it because I thought it was going to be the perfect like intro to my sister's bachelorette party before she got gay married 2 weeks ago. And then we ended up going a different direction. So now I'm planning on going probably tonight before our monthly lesbian dance party here in New Orleans.
I love all of that. I have not seen this film, but I'm excited to hear about its existence. I have not been as in the loop on the pop culture. Obviously, I've heard Cowboy Carter because, like, I'm not under a rock. But that film, that's something that is new to me.
Yeah, it's just like picture it. It's like Thelma and Louise, but they're in love. Like they U-hauled, they're driving, they're shooting, things are blowing up. So if y'all don't have any additional thoughts to share about cowboy hats or muscles, we can move into talking about harm reduction.
Let's do it.
Alrighty. So I'm going to start us off with a section about harm reduction in the South. But just to start, can y'all please share a bit about harm reduction in your own words? I really enjoy hearing different takes and just, what it means to folks based on their lived experience.
Yeah, I can jump in. For me, harm reduction is something that is so intrinsically connected to everything in my life, whether it's drug use in my community or living in the South. I mean, I live in New Orleans. So as we were talking about earlier this morning, the storms have already started in April. And so it's something that you have to be always kind of cognizant of, that there is a risk to anytime you're living fully, living your dream life, which we get to do so often. And so, how do we just mitigate that? And then harm reduction itself, like, in the services that we provide, is something that is also just so common sense and logical to me, right? That people use drugs and we just want them to be able to do that safely, to be able to do that in a way that minimizes their risk while still allowing them to live their lives the way they're choosing to do it. So I think that that's just so core to my identity, my experience, and my life here in the South.
Thank you, Alison. That was beautiful. I admire you so much.
I admire Alison too. But yeah, all those things. I feel like harm reduction is such a broad, like it's different for everyone, like what their definition is. You could go as simple as like reducing harm or whatever. But I feel like it's logical, like Alison said. It makes sense. It's compassionate care and love. Like people are using drugs, right? But people have been using drugs since the beginning of time, and it's just like our views and like what's acceptable and what's not acceptable just changes so often. But it's at the end of the day, I think it's just compassionate love and care, and it makes sense. Keeping people alive or getting them the tools and resources to do so, and it's just like unconditional like support, like we got you, and we're here. And but yeah. I know it's simple, but that's just what it means to me. It just makes sense, and it's just compassion and humane.
Sometimes we like have this tendency though to complicate like a simple idea, like and especially in public health, like we can do that. And it always kind of spins me around when I'm thinking about HIV prevention. I'm like, this is harm reduction. Like so much of what we're already doing is harm reduction, but somehow we allow ourselves to to make it more complicated so that we see it as a separate thing from what's already happening. And we know that it's been parallel, that people have been providing harm reduction and safer drug use supplies for as long as people have been providing condoms and safer sex supplies, right? That these things are intrinsically linked in our liberation as queer people, as people living with HIV, and as people who use drugs. And sometimes, it just seems so simple that you almost want to, as I'm doing now, keep talking about it.
Yeah, I do that too. Oh, I'm sorry. No, I was going to say, I do that too. It's like, it's actually, at the end of the day, it's really simple. And then it's funny that at times we just try to overcomplicate the answer. And I guess it depends on your audience of like who you have to like, harm reduction does this, but in your mind, it's like harm reduction is really just this simple concept, but you have to like spell it out sometimes for some people, so I think it's just that muscle when you get asked that question.
I really love that in your answer, you centered compassion, empathy, and just loving people, because I just think that there needs to be so much more love out there. There's so much sad and isolation and lonely and just a lot of, sadder feelings out. And I just feel like having love and compassion being centered in your approach with working with folks is just such a small, but really not a small thing at all.
Yeah, for sure. Like what I'm hearing and what y'all are saying is just that harm reduction is love in action. Like it's a way to, just be true to your values and like express that outward. And I totally agree that I think in public health, sometimes you have a tendency to overcomplicate things, but that really is what it is. And moving into our next question, would y'all be able to share a bit with me about like how you got into harm reduction work and what drives you in doing this work?
Yeah, I'll definitely share. I'll try to give the short version. But basically, I struggled with substance use for many years. I was a former sex worker as well. And I kept trying to like change. And, sometimes if you keep doing the same stuff, like you're going to most likely always get the same results. So I was like, something has to change here. And that's when I made the move to Asheville, North Carolina, in February 2020. And then 2 weeks after moving, after starting a job and stuff, I was like so excited for a fresh start. COVID, the lockdown started. So then I found myself at home, isolated, like many, many people, left to my own devices. And, I was starting to think back to like starting some of those old habits again. And then me and my sister, we felt like we were housewives because we were just at home collecting unemployment and then like, just going out doing errands because we were just at home with, not able to work. But we saw the mobile blood donation unit, and I was like, let me go get my $20 Walmart gift card. Okay. So we went up there, we gave blood. And then a couple of weeks later, I got a certified letter in the mail, and I had to go pick it up from the post office. And I was like, oh, I guess they're, mailing the gift card or whatever. Well, basically it was a letter from the blood donation clinic stating that they found HIV in the blood that I had donated. I had previous partners living with HIV. I had many friends living with HIV. But I guess like finding out in that capacity or in that way was really tough, even for myself being or having, witnessed people living with HIV or, partnered with people living with HIV. So it wasn't an unfamiliar thing to me at all. So I was scared, obviously. And then I was like, let me go get retested. And that's when I found Western North Carolina AIDS Project. And I went there to get retested. And I'll never forget his name, Devin. He did the test, blah, blah, blah. And then it came back reactive, of course. And I was just frozen for a moment. My sister was waiting in the car because I didn't want to go by myself. And we stood up and Devin looked at me and was like, would you like a hug? And that was one of the best hugs I've ever had in my life because I felt seen. Sorry, I'm trying not to get emotional, but I felt seen in that moment. And I didn't know the extent of the services at that time WNCAP provided. But he was in harm reduction and prevention that I found out later on. And then a couple months later, I saw the position open up for community navigation, which is patient navigation that was originally funded by NASTAD. So my first position with WNCAP or into this work was available through NASTAD, through a grant with NASTAD and WNCAP. At that time, so I started there and I was just amazed because at that time it wasn't familiar. Back home in Orlando, I wasn't familiar with like harm reduction resources or like programs, like they weren't, out or anything like that. So having the concept of people giving supplies for people who use drugs to stay safe I was just perplexed. I was like, what? We do this? Like this exists? And just, it was just a full circle kind of moment for me at that time. To just realize like people are doing this work and it kind of saved me in a way too. So that's a long story. But I was trying to do the short story. That's basically how I got involved with this work officially.
Thank you so much for sharing, Ray.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you can't apologize for a long story when it's a good one. And really brings like how incredible you are. For me, my experience with harm reduction in similar ways was as a person who used drugs and did sex work. Was a homeless kid traveling mostly around the South and living that life, but kind of stumbling into harm reduction as a career. Which now, looking back, over a decade later, feels so foreign. But as a young, homeless punk trans kid, I always really struggled to find jobs, and so sex work was a way more fruitful and accessible career path for me. And I had times where I was living in an abandoned building and got hired by a homeless shelter and was then fired for having a criminal record. So like experiencing these barriers to employment, even like going and trying to work at the drop-in center I had gone to as a teenager in New Orleans. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, I got to a point years ago where I was like the best place to work, or like the only place that's going to hire you as a very visibly queer trans person is probably the HIV services organization in your town, right? They're not perfect, but they're often a place where you can get a job where they're not going to like dismiss you out of hand. And so I just applied for the first job that they had that I could see. And it turned out to be the syringe service program coordinator. And in a completely, miraculous turn of events, it also was a syringe service program that I had accessed, that was in the drop-in center, which I didn't know because they had moved locations a year or so before I applied. So I kind of fell into, coordinating and then running the program that I accessed to get my hormone needles, to get my safer use supplies, even to get food and care items when I was a kid. And so that was this really incredible experience for me to be able to really have one of my first, like, big kid jobs be in harm reduction, something that I had been really passionate about and working on, in volunteer and community levels for some years. And so being able to do that for a living has been a really incredible amount of fortune and a gift for me.
Thank you so much for sharing, Alison. And for the next question, Ray, you touched on this a bit, so I'll open the question up to both of you. But I would love to hear about how your values as a harm reductionist inform your approach to the prevention work that you're doing now and have been doing.
Oh, can I jump in here for a second? Because Ray, you finished your story a little early. What's your current job?
Oh, yes. Well, thank you for sharing too, Alison. So I started as a community navigator / harm reduction specialist. And then I got the harm reduction coordinator position 6 months later. And then like a year and a half later, I'm now the director of prevention. So I oversee the prevention department and the harm reduction program. I know.
Oh, yeah.
It's surreal because, like 5 years ago, I just never thought I would be doing this work or be like on a podcast with you all. You know what I mean? Like I just never thought about that. So it's very humbling. But to answer your question, Shanice, I think having people with lived experience in the forefront of like harm reduction or prevention organizations is very important because, even sometimes now I have to catch myself because I'm not necessarily as frontlined as I was in my original role. So I get very like into the screen, like all day long for 8 hours a day, but I think it's really important because, it's kind of like that peer-to-peer relationship. Like I've been there or I've had a similar experience or I understand, I get it. And even managing peers as well that are more of the front line and just having that relationship and support and network is important because it like trickles down. But I hope that answered your question, Shanice.
It absolutely did. Alison, is there anything that you'd like to add to that question before I move on?
Yeah. Like I said, when I was kind of talking about harm reduction earlier, like I think that they're so intrinsically linked that it's hard to not have one inform the other. But it is something I've seen at organizations I've worked at, consulted for, or had colleagues at, where sometimes there can be a split between, capital P prevention services and harm reduction services, if they even exist at the organization. And I think that that's such a missed opportunity. I used to have experiences where I would do rapid HIV testing. And, if somebody came in to get tested and said that, relayed their sexual risk and they were sexually active and said they weren't using barriers because they didn't have access to them. Do you think I would not have a conversation with that person about being like, here is where our many shelves are, the condoms, the internal condoms, the dental dams, gloves, everything you need, right? Like, and of course, take what you need, but access is never going to be the issue there. But I had experiences where somebody would have almost the exact same experience, but around drug use. I have to share syringes because I don't have access to them. And because the syringe access program was its own program, you couldn't provide syringes in an HIV testing encounter. And so that's something that I've, really tried to work to change at places that I've worked at or had influence over, because it just makes so much more sense. If somebody says, I'm reusing syringes or sharing them because I don't have them, well, here they are. And oftentimes, a lot of those folks might need other prevention services too, because if they don't have access to syringes, they probably also don't have access to condoms and other barriers or, other prevention services. And so I think that, those things have to really inform each other, and they're also built on the same principles. Sometimes when I hear people talk negatively about harm reduction, it reminds me of being a queer person in the 90s, hearing the same exact arguments against providing condoms, against having testing access for like too close to a school or in a correctional facility. And so, yeah, these struggles are intertwined and they have to inform each other, or else we're only doing half the job.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you both. I would love to hear about what the harm reduction landscape is like in the South. Alison, you've had the opportunity to work on a national level, and Ray, you've worked across states. And I would just love to hear about sort of like what feels distinct to the South in terms of your harm reduction work, maybe, what gets overlooked that feels specific to the South.
Yeah. Thank you. And as you said, doing national work here with NASTAD and being on our drug user health grants team means that I get to work with a lot of programs and get to hear how things are going. Both our 75 incredible grantees in our cohort and other programs that I'm friends with folks at or know of and get to work with. And so some of the things from, more of a broad perspective that I think that sometimes can be overlooked is just what the policy landscape looks like in the South. That we can be in a significantly different place than a lot of other, large cities or legacy states, especially in the Northeast or the West Coast. And I want to just quickly caveat that as a person doing work and living in the South for the last 20 years, we can often have an inferiority complex. Things are so great there. Things are so great over there. The land of soy milk and agave in California. Everything's great in New York City. And as somebody who works nationally, I know that that's not the case. There's struggles and challenges and under-resources all over the place. But here in the South, there are, definitely policy barriers. For one, we can't grant to programs in Texas, Arkansas, or Mississippi because they still don't have their CDC determination of need from the state. So there's some states that can't accept federal money for syringe access. There's other states where syringe services are illegal, right? Again, Texas, Mississippi, Alabama. Well, we've seen legalization in many southern states, Louisiana, North Carolina, Florida, among others, right? Like sometimes those come with additional restrictions, like the Florida laws that say you have to do 1-for-1 exchange, which we know is not best practices, or the Louisiana laws, which say you can do syringe services, but you have to get local government approval, which means that some of the communities that need syringe access the most, which are, tend to be more rural or disconnected from urban areas, can often be the most difficult to get services in. Because, as you can imagine, going into a small rural parish as somebody from New Orleans and saying, I think y'all really should try this syringe service stuff, it can be an uphill climb. And then, there's also more restrictions around providing smoking supplies, providing test strips, things that we've seen changes on, but we're still working to improve the landscape so that we can provide folks the materials and the supplies that they're seeking. But it's not all doom and gloom too, because there's so much incredible work happening. Southern community caring and empathy is so strong throughout harm reduction. Going back to Florida for a moment, even though Florida has a 1-for-1 restriction in their law, and also some restrictions in the law that no state money can fund syringe services, which really makes it difficult for even health department staff or health bureaucracy staff to support the syringe service programs. We've seen incredible work on the Florida Harm Reduction Collective to build kind of this network that supports other syringe services around the state. So actually, there's a ton of incredible programs doing so much great work. And we see that from the grant perspective when we see programs around Florida have strong grant applications because they're collectively strategizing, they're networking, they're talking to each other and supporting each other. And so, even where there are policies that make it really difficult to have certain service networks and harm reduction community, we see the community step up again and again. And I wish that we didn't have to kind of rely on that that excellence and that drive, because it'd be great if people could do the work that is needed in their communities. But seeing that resilience in our community, seeing that strength in our community is incredible. And so there's incredible work happening in the South that many people around the South and outside can really learn from.
Thank you so much, Alison. Ray, is there anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, just quickly, I just seeing what's going on in Florida and like the collective, and I'm a huge fan of IDEA in Miami, and it's just seeing like that's going on back home is just so like wow. In Western North Carolina, a lot of the same things like Alison has mentioned is a common theme. Even in the rural areas of access to transportation, even technology now is oftentimes a barrier. But let alone like the political landscape too. I also wanted just to mention that for the past year or so, I've been really getting this awakening or this experience of what it really means to be a harm reduction program in the South. Like Western North Carolina AIDS Project has been established for many years, so it already has this like built reputation. But I go back and forth to Greenville, South Carolina. That's where I met my fiance, so I go back and forth, but it's like 45 minutes apart. But just like the political climate in South Carolina and seeing the board, there's a harm reduction program that serves the upstate South Carolina, Challenges Inc. I'm on the board as an advisory chair, but just seeing them trying to build their program up, because it's not technically legal in South Carolina either. There's this legal gray area. And there was actually a bill that was making great progress to legalize syringe service programs in South Carolina. But last week it kind of got pushed to the side. But it's just very humbling to see the struggles that to make this harm reduction work in the community. But yeah, everything Alison said, I definitely agree with.
Have to call out Mark Burrows at Challenges Inc.
I love Mark.
I love that program. Mark is incredible, close friend of all of ours, and within our NASTAD and Greater Southern Harm Reduction Community. Mark Burrows is amazing.
I'll also love having some shout outs to folks that have really impacted our work. So keep them coming. And Ray, congrats on your engagement. That's really exciting.
Oh, thank you. Yes. That kind of goes back to what I said earlier. I know we talk about Beyonce again, but like the Renaissance in that moment, it's just like I feel like I'm in the Renaissance of my life. So like that's why that music really resonates with myself. Like I just want to imagine. I'm not trying to gloat about myself, but like when Alison brought up my new position and just being engaged and having a loving baby Frenchie, it's just like, what is my life now? But it's just extremely humbling. But thank you so much.
That's so beautiful, and I just want to give you like all the kudos. One of the things that we love about the Southern Steep is that this is a podcast where we can give people flowers, and we're just really grateful that you can be here and sharing your gifts with us and like this rebirth that you are experiencing. Asheville's done well. Like look at you.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, so I was working in Florida at the health department during all of the time, trying to get the legislation changed for syringe service programs. And it's just really been amazing getting to see, it was so much work that went into getting that law changed. I know it's not perfect, but it's just been really, it's been really awesome to see the mobilization that's going on there and the continued growth.
Oh, I was just going to add to that I find myself as a harm reductionist thinking about these things. Like when I say it's intrinsic to everything I do, even working with policy or with laws like that, because while it's not a perfect law, it has opened the door for this network. And so I do find myself, even in the challenging policy times, reminding myself any positive change, right? That we're just trying to get a little closer to the world we're envisioning.
It's a step forward, and the momentum that has been built is, palpable. And it's just cool to see how, the momentum will continue to grow and what's going to come from that next. So we've talked about a lot of great things on this podcast today, but we are going to now shift to our closing questions. And I'm going to ask you both a two-part question. What do you love about the South, and what do you want to see for the South?
What I love about the South is the richness in culture, in communities, and the food, of course, but just like the culture and the communities. And I guess that kind of goes more so into the second part of that question is that there is still a great amount of work that needs to be done in ending the HIV epidemic, growing harm reduction programs, folks getting access to testing without stigma, or even harm reduction or prevention services without the stigma. There's a lot of work to still be done, but I feel like a lot of that takes place during like a conversation or coming together, or organizations that are doing the work or have alike missions or goals and coming together. It takes really that strength in numbers sometime to really come together and make that difference, is to have conversations to fight stigma. I think the South, we're very capable of doing that, but it's a lot of work to do.
I also love so many things about the South: the food, the weather, the people, community. I love the smell of jasmine in the air in New Orleans in the spring, the wildflower blooms, and just how incredibly warm and accepting people can be here. As I might seem like an unorthodox messenger for harm reduction, but I did so much traveling throughout the state of Louisiana when I worked for the health department. And, you can get so far with a smile and some charm, some common sense. And it always surprises people, especially from outside the South, that I feel comfortable going to, a small roadside pie stand or going to a parish council meeting and talking about drug user health, sex work, and harm reduction. And often the people, once they see you when you're sharing space and they see that you care about your community, that you care about this collective world that we exist in, they, oftentimes those folks are really welcoming and accepting. It's not always the case, but, it's easier to see us as this monolith from the abstract. And that's not really the case. That being said, what I want to see for the South is our incredible communities being able to do the work for ourselves, to lift ourselves up and overcome some of the barriers that are intentionally put to minimize our voices as queer people, as people who use drugs, sex workers, people of color. There's so many incredible people here that I wish had the same kind of platform around the South and around the country, because there's so much people can learn from us down here.
Say it louder. There's so much people can learn from folks doing the work in the South. And the South is such a beautiful patchwork of people, culture, food, smells, nature, just so much amazing gifts. And there's so much to learn from folks down here. How can folks get in touch with you and your organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can visit wincap.org. If you go to staff or people, you'll be able to find my contact information there as well. But you can see the amazing work that WinCap serves. Like, we currently serve 18 counties in Western North Carolina, and that's through like Ryan White Care, harm reduction, prevention. We have a large region that we serve, a large community that we serve. in different ways. But yeah, feel free to visit wincap.org. You'll find my contact information there.
It has been truly a pleasure. If you want to learn more, go to NASTAD.org, Drug User Health Team, really great resources.
NASTAD is hosting our Southern Syringe Service Program Institute this June 13th and 14th at the Omni Austin Hotel in Austin, Texas. We look forward to seeing you at our institute to talk about Southern harm reduction, and then probably also see you at Barton Springs.
It's truly been a pleasure having you both on the podcast. Shanice, it's been a pleasure talking with you today.
Yeah, I really enjoyed sharing space with y'all this morning. It was a great way to start my day.
Really, really great time with y'all. Thank you so much again. It's time for a segment we call Southern Charm. Here we highlight the work of someone or an organization that is charmingly impacting the South. On today's episode, we're highlighting Tristereo, New Orleans Harm Reduction Collective. Tristereo is an all-volunteer harm reduction collective based in New Orleans, Louisiana. They were founded in 2011 to affirm the dignity of people who use drugs and to address limited harm reduction resources in their community. They run a mobile and street-based syringe access program that provides fresh syringes and injection supplies, wound care kits, naloxone, education, and linkage to care. They also provide access to local resources and deliver harm reduction training to clinics, community organizations, nonprofits, and academic institutions. So they are our Southern Charm today, and it's just so cool to see the impact that an all-volunteer group is doing. So yeah, I don't know. Shanice, what else do you have for us?
Sadly, it's time to wrap things up. You know, it's always hard for me to leave this podcast. I'm Shanice Bailey.
I'm Nicole Elinoff.
And thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening, y'all. It's been good.
It's always good.